Shotgun Tom Kelly.
Beautiful.
K-Earth 101.
The weather, that is. It's a picture-perfect day in the city of the Angels. Clear tonight, overnight low tonight should be about 56. Sunny tomorrow, the base with a high expected temperature of 81. Currently in Los Angeles, it is 70 degrees with the Eagles and Hotel California on K-Earth 101.
I don't know how you'll take this, but he is God in this industry.
What he shoots is great, but he has that incredible ability just to be like hanging out with you.
We're going to catch that little fox and put him in a box and throw away the box.
Henry is the only one that we're gonna, allow to be around all the time, taking photos.
The reason that you have iconic artists that sticking with Henry or using Henry time and time again is because they love having him around. Just look at the tracker. The numbers speak for themselves, and the pictures speak for themselves.
There's so many facets to Henry that the only word that really comes to mind is amazing.
He's certainly another man that is able to capture great moments in time. I've learned from him in that respect.
He has a great sense of humor and he has a great laugh.
Squad, show me the way to the next whiskey bar. In the morning, when you rise.
We were all hippies in the 60s. We knew there was the Tibetan, Akashic records in the caves. We knew there were spirit guides. We knew there were angels,
It wasn't just long hair and beards and torn jeans.
I've been for a walk on a winter's day.
All the leaves are brown, and the sky is gray.
He was a natural because he was a musician.
Well, the stage was set, the sun was sinking low down.
Everybody'd love to have Henry take their album cover and do photo sessions with himself.
Henry's documentation of shooting most of those album covers is just integral to our memory.
He's just the best.
I love the information on where these album covers were shot. Like Morrison Hotel, that was shot in downtown Los Angeles.
And I took Crosby, Stills, Nash first album cover, the Eagles' first album cover, Jackson Browne's first album cover, many early album covers of people before they were really known at all.
The album covers meant everything to communicate so much.
Here is Jimi Hendrix playing at Woodstock early Monday morning, August of '69.
And he said, "John, you're trying to get to Woodstock, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Here's your only chance. Get in the helicopter. Woodstock's my hometown."
I believe Henry being the official photographer of Woodstock 1969 will be the key photographer within that festival.
I'm an observer. I'm an observer type. Some people call it fly on the wall.
The biggest obstacle you have when you're getting your picture taken is you think you're supposed to do something.
Saddle and he sleeps in the canyon, waiting for
Take us to your leader.
I wish I was that guy. Wow. So thanks for coming, folks. We're going to look at some pictures here, some little videos and stuff. I was happy being a folk musician in the early 60s. I loved traveling around, singing four-part harmony with the Modern Folk Quartet. And then one day, we were leaving University of Michigan. We were in East Lansing, Michigan. In the morning, we were leaving town, and someone looked out the windshield and said, "Look, a secondhand store." We had to pull in there and buy something we didn't need. And so we walked in. The one guy in the group, Cyrus Fario, was in front of me, and he walked in. There was a big table right inside the door with used Japanese cameras for $20. And he walked by, I was right behind him, and he said, and without stopping, he said, "Oh, a camera, I need one." He picked one up, and I said, "Yeah, what the heck?" Well, just impulse. I never thought, I want to take photos, I want to get a camera, I want to be a photographer. Never thought that. I just picked it up. And then we got back in the van, and he said, "Let's stop in the next drugstore, I'll buy film." He gave us all film. I said, "Well, okay," I put the film in. "How do you set these numbers?" He said, "Well, look on the box, a yellow Kodak box. Look on the box, it says Sunlight 250 at 8. I went, "Okay, 258, there it is." And for a couple of weeks, as we drove back to LA doing gigs, we took photos of each other. We took photos at junkyards and fields of cows and just whatever. We got back to LA, developed the film, and when I got the film back, I said, "Oh, look, they're little transparencies. They're slides." I had no idea what it was going to be. And I said, "Let's have a slideshow." So we invited all our stoned hippie friends, and we had this great slideshow. And the moment I became a photographer was when I saw that first slide, 8 feet wide, glowing in the dark. I just went, "Oh my God, it's like we're back there. I can't believe it." My family didn't have vacation slides. I didn't really see slideshows. So then I started taking pictures so we could have slideshows, because it was really fun on the weekend. And I lived in Laurel Canyon, and they were all musicians up there. Most of my friends were musicians, and I just photographed them. Mama Cass, Stephen Stills, Neil Young, the Turtles, all these people lived up there. And I would just take pictures like this. Just things to entertain my friends. This is Neil Young's driveway, right there. Actually, in Redwood City, right near here. And that driveway goes about a mile into the valley where Neil had his ranch. Gotta get my clicker here. And I got down, we were driving in there, and I got down on my stomach and had a 17 millimeter lens. I was like an inch from that flower, the big wide angle. And this is Neil Young's cow. And that's the other extreme. That's a 500 millimeter lens, That cow was quite a ways away. And one lady said, "Is that an owl?" Then a friend of mine, we call him Dr. Bill, he was a Freudian psychiatrist. He said, "It looks like a penis in my mother's shoe." It's a psychoanalytic joke. And then I photographed my friends. The girl in front, Suzanne Cohen, was the wife of our folk manager, Herbie Cohen. And her friend Terry had made these clothes. I just wanted to have some pictures, so we drove up the coast and just past Malibu. We found all these flowers. So that was the kind of thing I would take. And I would, show these pictures to my friends on the weekend. And so there's a couple of good friends. The guy on the left, Ron Jacobs, was a genius program director of KHJ Radio. He came from Hawaii, Kapoi in Hawaii. Took over KHJ when it was the lowest rated radio program, and by the next rating period, it was #1. And he did that by giving Real Don Steele, Charlie Tuna, all these. He gave nicknames to his disc jockeys that made him famous. And then when all the other stations would have the news on the hour and a half hour, he would have it 10 minutes after. So that when you couldn't get any music, only his station would have music. He was great. There he is. And it was his house that we had these slideshows. And that's Una. She was a dear friend, actually a friend of his wife, sister of his wife, Ron Jacobs. What a great friend. This is lawn bowling in New Zealand, where I was on the road with David Cassidy in the early 70s. So I would show it, my friends would shout out titles, which you're welcome to do if you think of something, but they would shout out a title. And I was showing these pictures at Mama Cass's house, and a couple of the guys from The Who were there, Pete Townsend and Keith Moon. And they were trying to outdo each other, shouting out things, you know. So Keith Moon said, "Did you see the size of those rabbits?" And then here, in the days before cell phones, we had beepers for about a year. Did you ever have a beeper? I had one on my belt. And I'd be driving around Hollywood doing it. Zzz, zzz, zzz. My wife would be calling, "Don't forget the milk or the bread." And you'd have to pull into the next gas station and get out and put a quarter in the phone booth. Say, "Okay, yes, honey, what do you want?" And I put the quarter in, turned around right on Sunset Boulevard. And that's what I saw. And I just had my camera right on my arm. Because, I mean, the gas prices, right? I mean, and then, here was a picture on the Hollywood freeway. That dog's gums and ears were flapping in the breeze as he drove past. Luckily, I wasn't driving, or I probably would have crashed. This one's somebody named Elmo at the beach. And that's that same 500 millimeter lens, like Neil's cow, you know, taken out. Here is the first actual, you know, music photo I took, rock and roll. I took pictures of my friends who were musicians, but this was the first group shot. And it happened because one day in Laurel Canyon, it was '66 is when I picked up a camera. And shortly after, I was walking down the hill and I heard music, guitar music coming out of a house. I knew everyone in Laurel Canyon, but it was Stephen over at a friend's house. And I walked up to the door. He said, "Henry, you want to come with us this afternoon? We're going down to Redondo Beach to a folk club to do a sound check. And you want to come along?" And I said, "Yeah, I do, because I wanted to go down on the beach and take photos for my slideshow." I didn't think, you know, I didn't go in the club. Probably, I didn't know how to shoot. Probably there was no lights on anyway, but when they went in the club, I went down to the beach and I took that picture of a guy. I always love that. I always think they have the same haircut and beard. He doesn't have a beard, but they look so much alike. It was one of my favorite pictures and a big hit in the slideshow, you know, with my stone hippie friends. And then I went back to the club, and this big mural was on the wall, and I thought, well, that's colorful. I like to get colorful things, you know, to try to wow my friends. And I was just sizing that up and framing, and the back door opened, and out came the guys done with their sound check. I said, "Hey, would you guys just stand there for a minute in front of that mural? I want to show how big it is." And then they stood there, and I started clicking away, and I took a roll of film. And then they did an interview at Teen Set magazine, and Teen Set called me and said, we hear you have a picture of the Buffalo Springfield. We'd like to run it in our magazine. We're going to pay you $100. I went, wow, I had never made a nickel, you know, taking a picture. So that was the start of my career, pretty much. And then my friend Eric Jacobson, who was at the show last night in Mill Valley, he was a record producer. He produced The Lovin' Spoonful, Chris Isaac, a lot of people. And he called me and said, "Henry, I hear you want to be a photographer. Come to New York, because the guys just had a big hit with Do You Believe in Magic, and they need a lot of pictures. So you'll go on the road with them all summer, and we'll pay for your film and processing, and you'll learn how to be a photographer." So that was great with me. But every time I tried to take a group shot, which is what they needed, I would get this, you know. Give me the finger for sure, or whatever. They didn't want to cooperate. So one day the phone rang. I lived at Zal Yanofsky's house, the guy with the hat on the left. And I was his tenant, but he called me his prisoner. And one day the phone rang. We were all at his house, and it was Mama Cass, who was an Earth Mother. You know, we call her the Gertrude Stein of Laurel Canyon. And she's always playing on these shows with young English groups that are just over for the first time. And she makes friends with them. She said, will you guys be there for a while? I want to bring some friends by. Sure, we're here. Half an hour later, she comes with the Hollies. We never met the Hollies, you know, we heard their music. We didn't know them. They came in at the Hollis house. We made margaritas. We told road stories. We had a great time. And then Graham said, oh, Henry, you're a photographer. We need some new photos. Could we come around tomorrow? And I said, sure, yeah, come around. And so they came. And look at that. And that's right next to Zolly's apartment. They look like Vogue models. They were posing. I didn't know what to do. I never had that kind of cooperation. And then this picture was a cover of their, an English album cover called For Certain Because. There's a photo collector, an album collector in here who said he has 1,500 albums. I wonder if you have this. It's in English. Only out in England, that cover. Then, I flew back at the end of the summer, flew back to LA, and immediately got a call from Tiger Beat magazine. And the photo editor said, we'd like to hire you for the day to go down to the Monkees, where they're filming their TV show, and you take photos all day, and we'll pay you, and you take the film, and great. And I made friends with these guys. And immediately, I was their age, I had long hair, loved beads. They said, before I started shooting on the show, that was the second season. First season, they were these, now that I'm an old guy, they were old guys taking a picture, but they were old, kind of heavy-set AP photographers. And they would go, okay, boys, do something zany, And they hated that. And so my approach was way different, just to hang out and see what happened. And so every week would be a new title, a new show. This was called, I always say, here a chic, there a chic. But then my friend Gary told me, no, it's everywhere a chic is what it was called. But lots of harem girls. It was always so much fun, so much stuff going on. And then, a couple of years later, the same guy from Tiger Beat magazine, Ralph Benner, he said, Henry, we'd like to hire you for the day to go down to the Partridge Family set and take photos. Again, it was the second season. I didn't know any of these people, but I went down and I met David right away. And we talked a little. I told him I'd just been living at Stephen Still's house in London, or in England, in the countryside. He said, oh, really? He said, the next break, let's go to my trailer. I have my guitar. I want to show you a couple songs. He wanted to be a rock and roller. He didn't want to be Keith Partridge. So we became really good friends, and I traveled the world with him for a couple of years, photographing his tour. This picture happened because I told David one time, when I'm at the Eagles' house, Don Henley and Glenn Fry, they're watching the UCLA sports, and they have a funny macho thing. They say, call Irving and have him send a limo for the UCLA cheerleaders. No, they never did. It's just their macho thing, And I told that to David, and then a German magazine, Bravo magazine, said, we'd like to do a home story with David. Ask him if he has any ideas. And he said, yeah, tell him to send a limo for the UCLA cheerleaders. And they came with the outfit and all that. We didn't know. And David became really good friends with the girl on the right. Her name was Delight de Bruin. And so years later, we started a gallery called Morrison Hotel Gallery in New York. And this picture was hanging on the wall. I wasn't there, but they tell me a guy came running in, ran over and said, that's my wife. Yeah. What a great day. That's his backyard in Encino. They had all the orange trees and everything. Linda Ronstadt, wow. Back in that's 67. Back in the early days when she sang at the Troubadour, she was in the Stone Ponies here at this point. I don't know, she's 19 or 20 there. Always barefoot. On stage when she played, always barefoot. Real country girl. Back in the great old hangout days at the Troubadour Club. Dan Fogelberg. Wow. he was a really good friend. It's funny how I met him. My wife Elizabeth and I lived up in Laurel Canyon, and across the street from us was a little cabin that got rented out. One day we came home after dinner somewhere, and we heard this beautiful piano music coming out of that house. We climbed the steps and sat there listening. It happened a few nights in a row. And then I went on the road for a week with somebody, and Elizabeth was watering the flowers in the morning at the front of the house, and this guy walked across the street and said, "Hey, I'm Dan Fogelberg." And she said, "I'm Elizabeth Diltz." He said, "Diltz? Any relation to Henry Diltz? Because I'm here in town to do this album, and I wanted to look him up to do the album cover." And there he was, right across the street. He was a Renaissance man, you know. He was a gourmet cook, classical pianist. He painted really well. He took photographs, and he wrote all those great songs. I mean, he was an amazing guy. And we were at my album cover designer partner, Gary Burden's house, taking these pictures, and Gary collected Indian artifacts, and he had that eagle feather sitting on the table, and there was a cat playing around at his feet. He picked up the feather to play with the cat, and then just looked at me, and that was it. That became the album cover, almost that. There she is, Mama Cass, the Gertrude Stein of Laurel Canyon. She really was an earth mother, you know, and she was just so, she was three things. She was really funny, she was really smart, and she was really hip. You needed all three of those things, really, to be her. And this was for, a lot of these pictures I took with, mention often my graphic artist partner, Gary Burden. We met at a Love-In. As a matter of fact, he saw me taking pictures, and he said, this was, early 60s. Probably 67. He said, "Oh, you're a photographer. I'm supposed to take a picture of Mama Cass's album cover. Would you like to help?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I know her, sure." And we became partners. For this one, Gary's idea, he always wanted to go somewhere and have an adventure. We went down to Palm Springs. We brought all that stuff. We took a limo. We always went at 2 in the morning. And we got there, at like 5, I guess, and laid the carpet out and everything. She laid out, and within a half an hour, her makeup was running down her face. When the sun came out, it was so hot. We had to check into the Gene Autry Motor Hotel, sit around the pool all day, and then we went back at like 5 o'clock and took this picture. It was supposed to be an album cover, but it was a billboard on Sunset Strip. The Earth Mother, this is her backyard. And once again, she was on a TV show with the Mamas and Papas, and Cream was there, and that's Eric Clapton. And he's very shy, famously. And she said, "Well, wow, you don't know anybody in town, and your first time in LA, you'll come up to my house tomorrow. I'll bring some friends over." She invited David Crosby. Mickey Dolenz came as well. But David Crosby's sitting there, passing me the joint, and he brought his protege. Excuse me. He brought his protege, Joni Mitchell. And he was just recording her first album. I'm going to turn my phone off. And he was recording her first album. No one had heard it yet. And she sat there and played the whole album. And he was looking at it. He just sat there for 45 minutes. You see how she lays her finger across the fretboard? She doesn't play chords. She just tuned it to a chord. Then she would lay her finger up and down the fretboard. And the great blues guitar guy had never seen that before. And that's Mama Cass's daughter, Owen, chewing on my Kodak film can. So here's Joni in the window of her very, very, very fine house where she lived in Laurel Canyon. And Gary and I worked for the artists, not the record companies so much, but the managers and the artists themselves, because I knew, they were all my friends, and Gary is as well. And so, their management said, "Go up to Joni's house and take some publicity pictures." So we walked up the steps in the morning, and she was waiting in the window. And we stood, and Gary talked to her for 5 or 10 minutes, and gave me time to take a whole roll of film of her just talking and stuff, which was great. I love this picture. And then we went up in the back, and took some more pictures up in a field. And here's Joni, and that's Gary Burton's daughter, Amy, wearing her Oshkosh, my gosh, overalls. I love that picture. Wow. A little video clip.
There were lots of parties and stuff, but this was a particular thing. It was an art gallery opening, and it was in Venice.
Here's what it was. It was a happening. I wanted to help a friend of mine, Boyd Elder, who was an artist. I had rented a studio. My wife made chicken tamales. I drove to Tijuana, brought all the Corona beer back because in those days you couldn't buy Corona in the U.S. And then I called all my friends. I called Jackson, and I called David Geffen, and I called Mama Cass, and I called the Eagles.
The Eagles had never played in front of people before, and they were going to try their tunes out at this party for the first time. They were standing over by the keg of beer, which was leaking all over the floor, and they were singing Witchy Woman over and over again.
I'd always wanted to make movies. So I set up like 6 or 7 different cameras, and I filmed it, I taped it. I had Nagra recorders surreptitiously recording conversations. Henry being my partner and being my friend, it was perfect that he would come and take stills. Well, I was directing and dancing and directing, and just, I mean, it was like, I had no idea what I was doing. Joni was dancing so hard, having so much fun, that beer bottles got broken on the cement floor, and she cut her foot, kept right on dancing.
I mean, anytime you see Joni, you're drawn to her. Just the way she laughs, and the way she talks about life, and the way she'll suddenly, tell you some story. And I love to watch her because she's quite animated. She'll be laughing and talking, and kind of carrying on, and you just gotta catch it right at that moment of sparkle. And here comes Joni's house. That was a very, very, very fine house. Then one day we just went to Joni's house to take pictures. And she got her dulcimer and went up in the back of the lot behind her house. Oh gosh, I just was dying, looking through the lens. She looks so beautiful and serene. All I really, really want our love to do is to bring out the best in me and you too. Often down at her management company, Lookout Management, she would be all dressed up for some photo shoot with some other photographer, and she would just look so great. And I would say, "Oh, Joni, just let me take one picture of you here as you walk out the back door." And I did that several times and got some really lovely pictures, kind of pirated pictures. It was for somebody else's session. Life is our cost, and I think your kisses my mind seesaws. Do you see how you hurt me, baby? So I heard you too, then we both get. We'd gone to Las Vegas, and we didn't want to take pictures around the casinos and the strip, so we got a taxi cab and drove out into the country till we got to these beautiful red canyons. And we got out of the car and took a bunch of pictures of her with the breeze blowing her dress, and they were very beautiful. And we got back in the cab and drove back to Las Vegas. God, the tab for the taxi was like $85. Which I didn't have, so Joni had to cover the taxi ride. Guess I still owe her that money.
What Gary didn't say was that first real grainy footage that he had, he had video guys doing all that, or film. No, it wasn't video, it was film. And but he had those reels of film in his garage for about 30 years, and rats peed all over them. And that's why it's so grainy, which is great. This is John Sebastian. When he left the Love and Spoonful in New York, he moved to LA, and he lived on my friend Cyrus's it was a musical commune. They called it the farm. It's a couple of houses and some little sheds and teepees and things. And on the farm was a lady named Tie-Dye Annie. And she taught him how to tie-dye. He tie-dyed every piece of clothing, his tent, his sheets, pillowcase, everything. And here is his clothesline. It's great. You'll see him later in his tie-dyes. Now so my friend, second from the left with the long hair, is Mark Volman of the Turtles. He lived across the street, 2 houses down from me in Laurel Canyon for a number of years. And we were really good friends. And so one time I went out for a weekend when they were touring Wisconsin. And you know, I want to say, I was a musician, and all of us musicians who lived in Laurel Canyon smoked a bit of God's herb. It just was a way of life. Before it was well known, you know, we just did it. It just made you think of songs. You would pick up your guitar and play music. It just made you feel so good, you know. And 8 hours in a van can be deadly boring, but you have a little toke of God's herb, and wow, things come alive. So we started out in the morning in Wisconsin, going to some school to do a concert, and we saw a sign that said cheese with an arrow. We said, oh, we gotta follow that. We gotta see where that goes. We drove for about 10 or 15 minutes and got to the Bass Lake Cheese Factory in Wisconsin. They're eating cheese on sticks there. And so we got back in the car and started back on our journey. And I saw that sign. I said, stop the car. I got it. And I'm always saying that. When I'm in a car, I see a great picture. Mostly, they never stop. But this day, we stopped. And then they wanted to be in the picture. When I was in high school, I had a girlfriend named Hetty Laurie. And her father was a brigadier general in the paratroopers. And he would always say, now, son, that's PPP. Poor prior planning. And when I saw that sign, I said, that is PPP. So perfect. John Stewart in Mill Valley. He lived here in Sausalito and Mill Valley. He was in the Kingston Trio, and he wrote Daydream Believer. You know, cheer up, sleepy Jean. Oh, what does it mean? The Monkees recorded it. But here's the thing, and he told me he wrote that in 5 minutes. He was shaving in the mirror, thinking about life, and about this girl that named Sleepy Jean, and how she didn't really understand life, you know, but his words said, you once thought of me as a white knight on a steed. Now you know how funky I can be. And when the Monkees recorded it, the executive said to my friend Chip, who produced it, now Chip, buddy, you can't have Davy Jones say funky. You gotta change that word. So it went, now you know how happy I can be, which kind of changed the whole song, right? But that was, boy, that song they sing all over the world, Buffy was telling me just the other day. And we were shooting this picture in a field with a water tank, and that snake just crawled over his foot. He reached out and picked it up. Yeah. Jimmy Webb, one of my favorite songwriters. Amazing, amazing songwriter. He's got that Oklahoma accent. If you hear his album where he just plays the piano and sings, it's just so amazing. And so he did this album, and he had a glider. And he liked to glide just north of LA. Pear Blossom was a place in the desert. And we went up there and we took pictures one day, and one of them became the album cover. I'm not sure, maybe it was, I think it was a different one, but like that. And then I went to his house and we looked at the pictures in a slideshow, and he said, wait a minute. And he ran in and got a tape of the album that he was working on, the London Philharmonic, playing this orchestral, like, you know, it was like the gliders, and wow, it was amazing. And we said, wow, that music goes so well. Let's go back out there and film it. 8mm, no 16, no 35, you know, we'll do a Hollywood movie. So we did, we rented a couple of big, huge cameras, and we went up. I was in front. the camera filled the whole cockpit. And then we wanted to be dramatic, so we had the tow plane pull us way up into those mountains. And then we would glide back down out onto the desert. And that's when the music would get beautiful and you'd glide out on the desert. But we got stuck in those mountains. It was a downdraft. And as we went for the last mountain, we were too low to get over it. And there's no engine. You're just gliding. He kind of turned it around. He said, "We're going down." I said, "Maybe we'll get an updraft." He said, "Whoa, we damn well better." But his instructor had taught him, if you have to fly into trees, it was all hills with pine trees and snow on the ground. There was no flat place at all, just hills coming down. And so his instructor told him, if you have to fly into trees, go through 2 trees equally and pull off both wings at the same time, or else it'll spin you around. It'll be far worse. So he did. He flew it right into the trees and took off both wings at the same time. We ended up, a few minutes later, we were unconscious for a few minutes, and we ended up with our tail up against a tree, kind of looking down at the ground. And it was deadly silent. It was so quiet. Then Jimmy said, "Are you okay?" He said, "That's what it feels like to die." And then he said, "Have you got a joint?" And I did. We sat out on our rock just going, "Oh my God," wow. And a helicopter came and picked us up. The helicopter came, a Jet Ranger helicopter, and the guy said, "I can only take you out one at a time because it's such a downdraft." It was a windy day on the desert, and it was a sucking downdraft. He said, we couldn't take off with 3 people in the helicopter, so that was quite an experience. There he is. Wow, Jerry. I was an LA photographer, Laurel Canyon. Jim Marshall was the guy who shot the pictures up here, and many other great guys, but Jim Marshall was the San Francisco guy that I knew. But David Crosby did a solo album, If I Could Only Remember My Name, it's called. And he said, "Henry, would you come up to San Francisco and photograph all the people who sang on my album?" So we went to Bolinas, to Grace Slick and Paul Kantner's house on the beach. And Jerry came over and Phil Lesh and a couple other people. And they spent the day sitting around, talking like musicians, hang out, smoking a little, drinking a little. And I just took pictures of everybody. So I love that portrait of him, just looking out the window. It's the only time I really photographed him. There's a guy I photographed a lot. Neil Young. This is his ranch in Redwood City, between Redwood City and Half Moon Bay. He owned that whole valley there. And Gary and I were both really good friends of his, and we go up and spend a weekend and walk around and take a lot of pictures for use in, covers and songbooks and stuff. And so one day we were walking around and, oh, wait, that comes later, sorry. We'll pick up on that in a while. Jackson Browne, wow. Now, I really, really like Jackson Browne. There's a little video clip that's going to come up, so I'm not going to tell you the story of meeting him. But we did his first album, Gary and I, and we'll see a little clip of that in a minute. But this is his second album, was called Late for the Sky. And Glenn Frey had, I don't think this is in the video, Glenn Frey had given this car to Jackson because it was a 55 Chevy in honor of them doing Tom Waits' song, Old 55. And Jackson had given it to a girlfriend, and she's waiting in the back seat. We borrowed the car back from her, had that painted on there, and then she's lying on the back seat with her feet up, just waiting till we were done so she could drive home. And Jackson he's hanging 12. That's a surfer thing. Here's the video.
For me, they're bigger than they are now, and they were like, I always thought of them like the shield, the way Indians would dream up. They'd literally dream or imagine or think of their thing that represented them.
Oh, people, look around you.
David Geffen, who managed Jackson and who owned the label that Jackson was on, Asylum Records, had called me and we were talking about this. And so he set it up for us to go and meet this young singer-songwriter named Jackson Brown.
Inside your houses, there's no time to find you now.
So we went up to the door, knocked on the door. Jackson opened the door, said, "Hi, I'm Jackson." We introduced ourselves, went in, sat down, opened up a beer, and Jackson said, "You want to hear the album?" And we said, "Sure." And he sat down at the piano and just played these amazing songs with these beautiful, heartfelt lyrics.
Every woman, child, and man who have no idea where they will go, but they'll help you if they can.
We used to spend a lot of time in the desert, and I had this water bag on my wall, and I was having a conversation with Gary. And I was looking, we were just discussing ideas, and I was on the phone with him, but I was just staring at this water bag. I said, well, you know, we could make it a water bag. Our generation knows what a water bag is. It's a canvas bag that you submerge probably in the tire trough, you know, at the gas station, and get it wet. So the flax, it's made out of flax, and it expands, and so that it holds the water. You fill it with water, and you literally hang it on the front of your car, so that when you pass through the Mojave Desert, the water sort of evaporates as it goes through the radiator grill and helps the car stay cool.
So we decided to make the album cover look like that. And I made it as authentic as possible, as is my want. And on the real bag it says saturate before using, meaning get it wet and then it'll be effective to cool the water.
On my water bag it said this saturate before using on the back. You know, it's like a little instruction. So when Gary marked this thing, he had one too, but his, you know, I don't know if he does yours set it on the front?
Yeah.
So when I saw it, I said, well, Gary, you know, we can't put that, we can't put that where you have it.
So Jackson said, you know, man, I'm really afraid if you put that on there, people are going to think that's the title of my album. And I said, no way, they never would think that, man. They know that's not part of it.
After so many years of people calling it saturate before using, the record company finally believed that that was the time when they put it on the CD. It was finally the
Water bag, and we needed a picture of water. Blah, blah, blah. So inside, you know. So Gary said, take a picture of water. And one of us suggested, you know, the Sparkletts bottle, I guess.
In your kitchen.
And I had one in my
And I
kitchen.
pushed the button and the water bubbled.
You weren't there. You were?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember. I pushed the button.
I pushed the button, the water started bubbling.
I remember taking the bottle and lifting it upside down,
right.
and quickly grabbing my camera, just like this, put the bottle in, dump it right on there, quick, you gotta do it quick. There's the bubbles, okay, here we go.
What is he turning around and around and around? What are you doing?
And then I went like that, there we go, and like that, and voila.
Oh, you guys didn't put the rim in water.
It's going over the edge now.
This is Richard Pryor. The reason he's in the show is that he had the same manager as the Mamas and Papas. And the manager asked Gary and I if we'd take some pictures for a cover. This was a publicity picture that we took later. And, you know, this was Gary's garage. And we whitewashed the inside of this garage and used it for a studio, natural light studio. There's a window, that's window light shining. That flag was up there for something a week before, and the watermelon was for lunch. But he came in and he was, you know, he was so funny, just everything was. Now, but this other picture, okay, well, let me tell you, the record company called and said, would you go to Richard Pryor's house and take a picture for a cover? You know, they don't they don't get into it. They just say, you know, in fact, Gary would always quote some of the executives saying, it could be a paper bag, you know, it doesn't matter, it's the music. But we went to his house, we knocked on the door in the morning up in the Hollywood Hills, and his wife said, you go try to get him up, he won't get out of bed. So we woke up, we hadn't met him yet, it was before this picture. And we walked back to his bedroom, and he's laying in bed, he opened one eye, and he says, just take the picture here. This will be the cover, me sleeping in bed. We said, no, come on, we have to think of something. He sat up then, and he said, well, if I do anything, I want it to be something rootsy. And okay, we understood what he meant. It was before the movie, Roots, you know, but Gary said, I know an antique store that has authentic Aborigine weapons and jewelry. Let me go and get that. And he came back a half hour later, and we went, okay, click, yeah. And there it is. So Richard knew where this little cave was, kind of a couple of houses down from him in a vacant lot up in the hills. And we went out there, and he posed like that, with it, and wow, he became that native. Don't you know? Keep away. It was really quite amazing. And then when we had a slideshow and looked at these, I said, Gary, that looks just like National Geographic, which was my favorite magazine when I was like in the 3rd grade. You know, they had all those topless women in there. I remember going to the library looking at. Anyway, he said, I'm going to get the famous San Francisco artist Rick Griffin to draw a magazine, you know, the National Geographic thing around it. So he did. He put yellow border and little oak leaves and stuff. And it came out, and we got 2 letters. One from the National Geo lawyers, who said they were going to sue us for defaming their famous logo. And then the second letter was from the Grammys, nominating us for Grammy Album of the Year, album cover of the year. So we did. The record company had to change it. They took the oak leaves off and put little Statue of Liberties around it. If you ever find that album, if you find a real one that looks like National Geo, they're kind of rare. But it's so great. I always say a lot of these pictures, really all of them, start with a phone call of some kind. And I'm in my kitchen in Laurel Canyon, the phone rings, and it's Peter Asher. He said, Henry, could you come down to my house this afternoon? There's this new singer-songwriter just did he was in London, he did an Apple album, and he said, he's over here, we're going to do an album, and we need publicity photos, which meant black and white, really. I know, that's color. I always like to shoot color for my slideshows. You couldn't project a black and white picture. But what they really wanted was a great black and white portrait. So when I got to his house, he said he's in the living room, and he was sitting there. That's when I walked in, that's what I saw. He was playing Oh Susanna, finger picking, like only he can do. And it sounded like a music box. And I just got down on my knees. I said, could you play that again? I took a few shots. Here he is. He was like behind the piano. Yeah. Playing. And then I said, we need to go outside somewhere where there's light and we can, get some pictures. Let's go to my friend's musical commune, the farm. And we went over there where there was lots of little buildings and sheds and things. And so there was a farm truck there. And I love to photograph trucks because they fill the frame. They're rectangular, trucks and cows. I like them. So I really like the trucks. They have such a personality, And then we walked around the little sheds, and he was standing there leaning against the wall. We weren't really talking very much, just kind of hanging out, And that's Tie-Dye Annie's house right there, that little shed, as a matter of fact. And then you see that big post sticking up. The next minute he walked over and leaned on the post with his arms. And I took this picture in black and white. And I took it in black and white because they wanted a portrait in black and white, but I thought, gosh, I can't show this. I got to take a color shot too. So I said, don't move, James. And I reached down and picked up my other Nikon, which had color film in it. and took a color shot just so I'd have a slide for my slideshows. But Peter Asher saw that slide, and that became the cover of Sweet Baby James. But they cropped it, you know, kind of severely. And this is the picture. This is one of my favorite portraits. Because once it's rectangular, you know, it's all about, I have a framing Jones, you know. When I frame something, it feels good, you know. It makes me feel good. That is one of my favorite pictures. This is the group America. We did, I think, 7 of their covers. And for this one, and Gary always had the idea, let's get the group out of town, away from their girlfriends, away from their managers, away from their phones. We didn't have, you know, cell phones then. And so for this one, we rode horseback through a Cahuilla Indian reservation in Southern California, a 2-hour horseback ride. And Gary wanted to bring a mirror, but that mirror, so he could put it on the ground, was his idea, and the guys would peer into it, and I'd take a picture, and it would look like a hole in the ground. And I thought, well, that's kind of a dumb idea, I thought. But nonetheless, the Wrangler had to carry that mirror for 2 hours, horseback, and then we got to this little date palm oasis, and right at the end of the day, and Dewey, the guy in front, wanted to go up the hill, it was quite a ways up, and look at the bats flying around. Now this is with that big 500 millimeter lens. They were way, like 2 or 3 times higher than this, way up. And so Dewey said, I'm going to run up there, and Gary said, why don't you all go up there and bring that mirror with you? You know, and I thought, oh my God, you know. So they were up there, I'm looking at my lens, and I can see a light bouncing as they walk along. And I said, hey, you guys, stand still a minute, you know, and that was the moon coming up behind us. We couldn't see it in the valley, and the sun setting on the far side. And so Jerry Beckley, the guy in the back, and I both loved this picture way better than that hole in the ground thing. But Gary liked that, so what he did was genius. He, instead of putting the slit on the side, he put the slit on the top. So it was two-sided. You didn't know which was the front and which was the back, which was great. But I love that picture. So then, for the Eagles' first cover, we decided we'd get them out of town and go to Joshua Tree. So we left the Troubadour at 2 a.m. when the bar closed, and we rode out to Joshua Tree in some Land Rovers, and we got out there. It was still dark. It's a 3-hour drive, and it was like 5 in the morning, and we climbed this mountain in the dark, this hill, another big hill, and it was a famous hill where certain musicians went to take psychedelics. I think the Rolling Stones went up there one time. It was a famous, then you had to go through people's properties. You couldn't get to it just like a normal public person, but we knew how to get there. And so there they are. They look a little haggard. They've been up all night. There's Glenn Fry in the back looking haggard. And it just, you know, just the sun is just coming up. And we spent the day up on top of that mountain. And Gary would always say, just shoot everything that happens. Film's the cheapest part. You know, we'd have this adventure. We brought some peyote buttons with us that they had gotten from an Indian medicine man, Semu, a Cahuilla Indian medicine man. So we tucked these peyote buttons in our cheeks, and then we spent the day up there, and that coffee pot has peyote buttons bubbling, and we're making peyote tea. And we actually spent the whole day mostly laughing. Everybody had such a good time. And that little bag in the lower left is that peyote bag there, medicine bag. Then, later that year, 72, they made this Western album, this cowboy album, Desperado. And so Gary knew where there was this old rundown movie ranch out in the Malibu Hills in Agoura. And we got them all dressed up in movie outfits and guns with blank ammunition, and went out there and spent the day playing cowboys. And we're going to see a little video of that now here, which we made.
That album's really when I came into my own. I was a pretty silent partner on the first Eagles album. I didn't have very much to do with it. But then somewhere between the first album and the second album, Glenn and I became the songwriting team, and I showed him this song I had that eventually became the song Desperado, and he helped me finish it.
I don't know the Who had done a quick one while he's away, but you know, there was this sort of rock opera concept album idea floating around, and we sort of saw ourselves as living outside the law, just like the guys we were writing about.
Not outlaws in the sense of outlaws today, maybe, here down 20 some odd years down the pike, but yeah, more of a Robin Hood kind of thing, I guess. But we were young and we had grandiose ideas.
So we wanted to make an image that would fit this conceptual music they had put together that was that story of the parallel between the guitar player in the 70s and the gunslinger in the 1870s. What it was is these four guys come to town and they've decided to stop working and to take the easy way and become outlaws. And so they go in and rob the bank. They come out of the bank, and in the process of doing it, they get killed.
Okay, we're all ready, I guess. Here we go. We're all set now. Let's see, yeah. Yes. All the guns, man. Everybody's going to be firing in the direction of this building right here.
All the roadies were playing the posse. And not only the roadies, but their manager, their record producer, all dressed up. And Boyd Elder, a friend of ours who's an artist from Texas, was riding through, galloping on his horse. You know, everybody was shouting. I mean, it was really like really being there. You know, it was like being back there in the Old West, except instead of the old Matthew Brady box camera, you know, I had my Nikon motor drive and my Minolta Super 8.
So we know, I can't see Jackson, JD, Boyd. Y'all gotta be in for picture.
Actually, before they came backing out of the bank with their guns blazing, we had spent an hour or so kind of trying to set this up, kind of doing a dry run before we actually loaded the guns.
1, 2, 3.
And so they would kind of come out and just kind of stand there in the tableau, kind of moving around. And those pictures just they look so old. They look like they really were taken back in the 1800s, you know, them kind of standing there with these wild looks on their face, you know. And when the actual gunfight happened, the first time, I mean, they all came backing out of the bank, emptying their rifles and their 6 guns. And the roadies were running down the street at them, all firing, and guys were yelling and rolling in the dirt. It was just amazing. It was a huge tableau of this entire gunfight, and these guys totally transformed into outlaws.
It was fun just shooting guns, you know, just blanks.
After all the smoke cleared and most everybody was laying dead in the street, and Henry just kind of handheld just took the Super 8 and started tracking over, you know, one guy's body and then past another guy's boot and up his body and stuff. It was really, you know.
So it was like the beginning was these young guys coming to town. It was to be, this is now a single album. It was meant to open up, and inside was this great panorama of them having this gunfight backing out of the bank with blazing pistols. And then the back was the shot of the gang laying dead on the ground, and all of the lawmen up here who shot them and killed them, much like they actually did in those days, where once they capture an outlaw, they, you know, and kill him, they'd prop him up and take photos of him.
it's been a record and a concept that's withstood the test of time, and it's gotten better as the years have gone on.
As
you
a
know,
piece, right?
as a whole piece. Yeah, it's now, you know, it's a well-recognized concept album. But at the time, there were some people who weren't too happy. All they could think of was, oh, they made a goddamn cowboy record. Where's Witchy Woman? Where's Take It Easy, for Christ's sake? They made a fucking cowboy record.
That was the record executives who said that, you know, the guys at the record company. Oh man, what a day. I'm glad we have pictures. God, just, that was a throwback. It was 1870, you know, 1872. This was 1972. And there's Jackson Browne on the left there. For about a year, he had a little mustache. So he's standing there, and they're blasting away. And then here he is, he hits the ground, right? And you see all that smoke rising. Fire trucks appeared, you know? Somebody said, hills are on fire, and all the fire trucks. Oh my God, what a time. Oh, wow. And here's Neil Young, driving his World War II Jeep, bouncing over in the cow fields up in Redwood City. And then here is the picture that one morning we took a walk on his farm, and he wanted to show Gary and I a little old guitar he had in the back of a barn. And when I just turned around, and he was standing there with that little dog. That's his dog, Hart. H-A-R-T-E, named after Bret Hart, the old cowboy short story writer. And that's his cattle on the hillside there. Just such a serene, you know, ranch shot. It was really fun. He had llamas, he had geese, and we would walk around, you know, smoking a joint in the morning, just having a great time. So here he is playing That's the Little Guitar. And this was right about the time he was working on Harvest. And we probably would have done that album cover, but Gary left town to go somewhere. And so Neil just put it out with the word Harvest on it. There was no photo, but this might have been, one of these might have been the photo, because we were kind of, you know, taking that kind of shot. But that's the old barn that the guitar was in. That's the kind of picture I like to take. Just, you know, fly on the wall. You know, I never went to photo school. I wasn't a photographer. I was just a musician who knew everybody and hung out and had my camera. I never said, okay, you know, look this way. I never told them anything. I would just sit there, and I knew musicians hang out, you know. And if you're a musician, you automatically belong to the club, and you can, you know, you're instantly friends with musicians anywhere. And so that's how I was able to get these pictures. I'm just gonna hang out and see what happened, but that's the kind of thing I like to take. That was breakfast one morning in the highway there, going up Malibu, the Coast Highway. Here, this is Tom Waits. A friend of mine, Stephen Peoples, is a music writer. He called me one day and said, Henry, I'm going to interview Tom Waits down at Coppola Studios. You want to come along? And I said, yeah, sure. I knew Tom Waits. I just came along. It wasn't a job. But he was kind of a prisoner in this little room. He was doing the music for One from the Heart, a Coppola movie. And so he'd just spend the day, all day long, in this little room, just big enough for a grand piano, and, you know, and papers all over the floor. And so that was just a kind of a hangout picture. Here is Chris Christopherson and his daughter up at Caribou Ranch in Colorado. They had a big recording ranch, and they had a stable. I went up there with, America, Peter Frampton, several, David Cassidy. I went there 4 or 5 times to do album covers. And every time the rock group wants to ride the horses, and then I come along to take pictures, but then they want to gallop. They always want to gallop. And I've got these camera bags and cameras going, boom, boom, like this. It happens every time. Not this moment though, that was a good picture. my phone rang in the kitchen in Laurel Canyon. It was Rolling Stone in New York. I didn't work for them very much, really. But that day they called. They said, "What are you doing today?" And I said, "Nothing, you know." And they said, "Could you go straight to the Burbank airport, get a flight to Palm Springs, go to Truman Capote's house, and take a color picture of it? We have a big story ready to come out, but no cover. It's all black and white." And so I went there, got to rent a car. I'm knocking on his door, and I'm thinking, I'm knocking on Truman Capote's door. I mean, being a photographer was like having a passport into people's lives. You know, I read his short stories in college, you know. And so anyway, he was very nice, and we spent an hour or so out in the backyard. He was leaning against statues, and I was taking pictures. And then when I was leaving, I walked out the front door, and I was just turning to say goodbye, and he said, "Wait a minute, I have an idea." And he ran back in and came out with that huge coat and the scarf, and that was 107, you know, in Palm Springs. And he just stood there in the front door looking out. I'm out on the front porch. And I went click, 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 and then, okay, goodbye. And then that became the cover. Very often, it's the last roll of film or the last couple of pictures you take that kind of, you know, builds up to that. And that certainly happened that day. And when they did that movie recently and had somebody playing him, they used the same kind of picture with that hat and the scarf as the poster. This is Bangladesh. George Harrison and Bob Dylan. This happened because, well, there was a lighting guy named Chip Monk. His name was Edward Beresford Monk, but his friends called him Chip. And he was famous. Well, in a lot of our folk concerts that we did on the road, he was the lighting director. And then he became the lighting director at Woodstock. It was the voice of Woodstock. The guy who said, you know, "Don't take the brown acid," and all that was him. So Stephen Stills, who was my friend, and he did a concert at Madison Square Garden one night, and I was there photographing, and Chip was doing his lights. He said, "Henry, you should come back here tomorrow because we have this big charity George Harrison is doing for Bangladesh." I said, "Well, Chip, you know, I don't know the Beatles. I don't know those guys. How am I going to get a photo pass?" He said, "Look, I'll give you a crew pass, and you come in early in the day, in the afternoon, and hide your cameras under my lighting board, right here, like this, right here at the side of the stage." They were right out there, a little bigger stage, but, and so I did. I hid them because they were kicking out anybody with the camera. And so when Dylan came out, I pulled my cameras out and got a couple of shots. There was a second show later, and that was an afternoon show, I think, and then an evening show. And I did go out front and took some pictures, one of which became the cover of the video for this day. But that was a great moment. This time the telephone call was a roadie that I knew who worked at Studio Instrument Rentals in Hollywood. He said, "Henry, I'm down here with the band rehearsing. It's Ringo's All-Star Band. And they want to have somebody take pictures for a little tour book, you know, and could you come down?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll come right down." I went down. Ringo, I said, just meeting Ringo for the first time, I said, "Now, Ringo, do you mind if I get up on stage while you're rehearsing? Because I have to get a good shot of the drummer and a good shot of everybody." He said, "Look, I'm the drummer. You're the photographer. It's as simple as that." And so we were great friends from then on. And I mean, that day we were just backstage. He pulled the thing off one of the cases, the instrument case, what a nice head. Such a funny guy. I photographed all of his all-star groups, you know, while they were getting, you know, before the tours. And I had to go up to Vancouver one time and shoot them rehearsing in a club up there. And so the band was on stage, and his son, Zach Starkey, was playing the drums. And so I was alone on the dance floor looking up at the band, and then Ringo jumped off and jumped on the floor to stand next to me to listen to what the sound was like. Just then, Zach played an amazing fill, and I said, "Man, Ringo, where did you find that drummer?" And he said, "In me loins." I mean, that's 8 days a week. I mean, a lot of those phrases came from him. There's Paul and Linda. I took this picture because I knew Linda, and I met her in New York when I was there for a while, and we met in a photo lab. Well, I can't remember the name of it, but I almost can. But we were in a photo lab, and we were getting our film developed, and we met. We had lunch a couple times, so we were friends. And then about a year later, she married Paul McCartney. I read, I thought, wow. And a little while after that, she called me one day and said, Henry, we're down here in Malibu, and we need a picture of the two of us. And so she was his photographer from then on, but she had to be in the picture. So I went down, and I knocked on the door. It was a house on the beach they'd rented. And the maid answered the door, said, they're upstairs, just go out on the patio, they'll be down in a minute. And I went out, I'm looking at the yard, and then I hear this, Henry. And I look up, and Paul is in the window, the second floor window, looking down. And I'm just meeting him for the first time, right? And he says, have you got anything to smoke? And I did. I'm telling you, we became such good friends. It was great. And we sat by the pool all afternoon. We had lunch, and the little girls were swimming, and there he is. And there's, that is Mary McCartney. Stella hadn't been born yet. And he was plunking on that uke, for like hours. He'd just sit there plunking on the uke. And at one point, the little girls, there was Linda had a daughter, Heather, a few years older, and the two little girls held hands and jumped in the pool. And he was going, plink, and he just started singing, two little sisters jumping in the pool. I thought, wow, there's a McCartney song that nobody else will ever hear. And then it was. And I knew years later, when there was that song, who's that knocking at the door? Sister Susie, Eddie Min, open the door, let him in. I knew he was sitting with his feet on the coffee table, playing the guitar, and there was knock, and he said, who's that knocking at the door? And I asked him about that recently. He said, exactly right. He said, so that's how he wrote those great songs. Just whatever they were seeing. I saw him on, there's this thing called David Frost versus the Beatles. It was on the other night. And Paul McCartney said, it was such a pleasure to write with John. We would get together just about every day, and in 2 hours, we'd write a song. We wrote 300 songs, he said. And I know that they, lovely Rita, meet her maid, whatever they saw, they would write a song about it. So great to be that kind of observant and poetic, right, and musical. It's pretty amazing. I mean, these people are my heroes, all these people that I photographed. But that was such a great, oh my gosh. And here's an early selfie. There's the two girls up on the slide. Oh, and then about 4 years later, I got a call, and it was a ship's radio. It was like, Henry, could you come to the Virgin Islands and do some photos? And I said, yeah, who is this? It was their road manager said, the McCartneys want you to come out here and photograph wings. And so I spent a week on Watermelon Bay in the U.S. Virgin Islands. They had 3 boats, never stepped on dry land the whole week. They lived on a catamaran, Paul and Linda and their girls, and a nanny. There was a big, huge motor, cabin boat that was converted to a studio where they were recording the soundtrack to London Town. And so I knew that Paul liked to smoke it, as all musicians did anyway. But I thought, okay, I bought an ounce of Maui Wowie. I never bought one before for myself, but I bought it. And I took it, it was before all the security at the airports. I flew out there with it. There wasn't enough for the whole band and all the crew, but just for Paul and I. So several times a day, he would walk up to me on the deck and say, Henry, if you got one rolled, Yes, and I always did. We had so many conversations, you know, that I don't really remember looking out at the water. Anyway, it was great fun with Wings. Oh, here's another guy. Now, Stella took this picture. Stella, that's Mary McCartney. And Stella was born by then, and you know, she has the big fashion empire. But she took that picture, and I put it in a book, and I wanted to show Paul. He was playing at some place in LA, and I sent it into the dressing room for them to look at. And Stella came running out, gave me a big hug, and said, "Thank you. Nobody's ever given me credit before," because I put photo by Stella McCartney. No one's ever given me credit, you know. So that was great. Boy, there's the boss, huh? Somebody said some unkind things about him lately, but I think they were totally wrong. You know, I photographed him like at the Hollywood Bowl for a Peace Sunday, and this was a veterans benefit. I would always see him, he would do 2 or 3 songs. I never went to a whole Bruce concert, and then about 5 or 6 years ago, I went to one, oh my God, 3-hour concert, and everybody's standing the whole time. I never sat down. I mean, amazing, what a guy. And to call him a dried up old prune something, but I mean, wow. Enough said. Now here's these guys on the couch. And there's a story about this, which I'm going to let our video tell the story. There's one more picture. So we were just taking publicity photos. I mean, Gary and I knew these guys for years. I met Stephen in 1963. He was a fan of our folk group because we did 4-part harmony, and he was like 19 years old. And he would come to the Village Gate in New York and sit on the stage to hear harmony. I met Graham in '66 with the Lovin' Spoonful. I knew David from the Troubadour. So we knew these guys for years, and they got together, and they had no photos whatsoever to even put in Billboard to say these guys are together, you know, recording. So we took this picture in West Hollywood, and I'll let the video tell you the story.
In the Village, before any of us were anybody.
It was obvious that Crosby and Stills were hanging out because Crosby had been thrown out of the Byrds and Stephen had left the Springfield, you know, it disbanded. And she knew that these two musicians, you know, were great musicians and had something going between them.
David and I were messing around talking about, you know, doing something, and she comes up to me and says, "Do you think you need a third voice?" And I said, "Yeah."
And she knew what it would be like musically if I sang with them, even before we did.
She said, "Okay, just don't say anything, especially to Crosby, and when I call, come."
The Hollies were staying at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Los Angeles. And Cass called me and she said, "I'm going to pick you up in 10 minutes. I want to introduce you to somebody." So I got ready and I was waiting down in the lobby of the hotel, and she pulled up in this convertible Porsche. And we got in and she drove me up Laurel Canyon to this house that also had a convertible Porsche in the garageway.
That's why there's this big argument about the first thing we sang was at Joni Mitchell's house. No. It was at Cass's. We were at the kitchen table, which was the third room up, and outside it was the pool.
And that moment is indelibly etched on my soul. I mean, when we first started to sing "You Don't Have to Cry," David and Stephen sang it first. I asked them to do it again. I listened very carefully. I asked them to do it one more time. And they looked at each other and went, "Well, okay." They sang it a third time and I put my harmony in, and it was unbelievable.
In the morning, when you rise, do you think of me and how you left me crying? Are you thinking of telephones and managers and where you got to be at noon? You are living a reality I left years ago and quite nearly killed me. In the long run, it will make you cry, think you're crazy. before your time. And the difference between me and you, I won't argue right or wrong, but I have time to cry, my baby. You don't have to cry, I said cry, my baby. You don't have to cry, I said cry, my baby. You don't have to cry.
Back when I had hair, when I was a thin lad. Can I tell them the story about this?
Yes, you should tell that.
Well, you probably can tell, but we are not in the proper order here.
We knew that we were going to use our names because we'd all been in bands like the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield and the Hollies, but we had not decided what we were going to call ourselves. So this day started in Gary's house on San Vicente. Here's one of the proof sheets, one of the many proof sheets of us all sitting on the back porch singing and stuff. And we would actually be singing. This was not posed. This is how we'd do it. We'd just sing.
Chestnut from Canary, ruby-throated sparrow, sing the song, don't be long, thrill me to the marrow.
We found the house, I think, a day earlier or something, and it was opposite the Santa Monica Car Wash, if I remember rightly.
Well, here we are on Palm Avenue. That used to be the Orange Julius stand right there.
Voices of the angel.
And it had this funky vibe, and it had this really old, decrepit couch, and it kind of fit with the kind of image that we wanted to project, which was down home and comfortable and funky, and that's how the music was.
Yeah, it was right here. This was it, right
We
here.
are like inside the house right now.
Exactly. And that's where those guys lined up.
Forward a little more. This is where they were sitting on the couch, right about here. Okay. You be still, and I'll be now.
Okay.
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 And Henry, back up a little bit so you can
Get
get
a
the whole
wider
house.
shot,
Yeah.
Okay, you guys, now this is it. Let's
Watch the birdie.
Right.
Okay, and then we just went like this. Skunk. And then you said, back up a little so you can see the whole
back
house.
up. Get a wider shot.
Right, so then went back here like this. I put on like a little telephoto. And okay, fellas, look up this way.
Right. Right by your center. Steven, hold that guitar up a little bit, man. Great. Yeah, great.
A few days after taking this picture, they actually named themselves Crosby, Stills, Nash. At the time of this picture, they hadn't settled on a name. And so when we looked at the picture, it's actually Nash, Stills, and Crosby, which is backwards. And I remember thinking that would be very confusing. And we all agreed that we'd go back, a couple days later and retake the picture.
We went back the next day to reshoot this, and the house was gone.
It wasn't there. I mean, it was just a pile of timber in the back.
This is why people for years have been coming up to me and saying, "Gee, Nash, so pleased to speak to you."
This was one of the first covers I ever did, and I tried, because in those days they demanded that you have certain things on the record cover, like where it says stereo and the company logo and the type on the top and all that stuff. And I've tried to lay everything in so that it would be least conspicuous possible, so you really could see your photograph in the best possible light.
Talking there and designed that. He was actually an architect, and he was helping Mama Cass build something onto her house, and they got to be kind of smoking buddies, and she said to him one day, "Gary, I'd like you to design my first solo album cover." And he said, "Well, Cass, I'm an architect. I'm not a graphic designer." And she said, well, you make a blueprint, you make an album cover, what's the difference, you know? He said, well, you know, okay. And that's when I met him at a Love-In, and he saw me taking pictures. But also, being an architect, they work with different materials. And so the great thing about that album, well, the CSN album, is that when they went to print the album, he went to the printers and he said, I want you to turn the paper over and print it on the back of the paper, the uncoated side. All album covers were glossy. But he said, they said, well, we can't do that. It's going to soak up the ink, you know. And he said, no, I don't care. I want you to do it. And they printed on the back side, and it made that album cover tactile, you know. It was organic. You could feel it. It was a great feeling, kind of like wooden music. I mean, it was so great that he thought of that. And so many covers after that were printed that way. For the middle of the album, we had to go up to Big Bear. Well, Stephen had bought fur coats for all the guys, you know, to celebrate the album. So we thought, well, we have to go where there's snow, so we'll go up to Big Bear. And so we took a limo. Gary would always get a limo, and we'd drive up to Big Bear. It was David Crosby, Joni, and Graham in the back seat. Stephen was up with the driver, looking out the windshield, and Gary and I were in the two jump seats on each side, facing backward. So my knees were touching Graham's knees right there. I was that close. So I tried to look out the window most of the time to give them the privacy, you know, and I turned around and saw that. I just, you know, they didn't know I took it, but wow, great moment. So here they are up in Big Bear. We had a great time. Graham fell in the bushes and tore his trousers, you know, and had a little cut on his butt, you know. And Joni went to the limo and got the first aid kit, you know, and he's bending over and she's patching up his bottom. It was great. We had a great time. And here's a picture of them. This might have been, well, Crosby, Stills, Nash Young, Dallas Taylor, and that is Bruce Palmer from Poco. He was the Poco bass player, and he was going to be in this group, but he was Canadian, and his visa somehow had expired. He had to go back to Canada, and then they got another Dallas, let's see, Crosby, Stills, Nash, Young, Taylor, and Reeves. Greg Reeves was a black kid who played on Motown albums, and he told him he was 18 years old, but years later I met him, he said, you know, I was 16. He said, and then he just turned 17 when they were recording. But he was in the group, so. And look, David is really having fun giving Stephen the bunny ears, right? And he didn't know that Graham was the end. Anyway, you know, it's funny. I was in a card shop in Mill Valley yesterday, and we were looking at cards. It was this funny card, 3 rabbits holding up one of those sticks with a cell phone, taking a cell, and one of the rabbits is doing bunny ears to the guy next to him, behind his ears, you know, and it says, you idiot, you know, and the other. So, it reminds me of this. Here they are in the dressing room in Minneapolis, their first away from LA concert they did. And of course they're in a sports stadium, so they're in a sports dressing room, and they would warm up just before, this was moments before they go out on stage. They just sing half a song to kind of get together. That's one of the truck drivers there smoking a cigarette, listening to the harmony. It was so beautiful. And they broke up after that first album over a girl. Stephen had just met, what's her name, Peter? Rita Coolidge. Was that right? Yeah, that's right. Sorry, folks, you might, I might ask your help once in a while, like here. Yeah, Rita Coolidge. He met her and like fell in love right away, and then he introduced her to Graham immediately, and Graham and Rita really hit it off, and then Steve was saying, it's really something when your best friend snakes your girl, you know, and they broke up, and so he went to, he had hurt his hand in a car accident, and he asked me if I could, there was a disc jockey in Hawaii who had a beach house. Can you ask him if we can go and hang out? And we hung out there for a few weeks. Then he said, I'm going up to Colorado. You want to come? I came up to Colorado, and one night, there was about 4 or 5 of us hanging out at this cabin, and one night the payphone in this little cabin rang, and he got the news that Jimi Hendrix had died that day. And of course, everybody was very sad. He was recording with Jimmy, and he sat up all night, kind of playing the piano. And in the morning, someone looked out the window. Wow, snow! There hadn't been any snow today. He said, "Quick, grab your camera." He ran out there with his guitar, sat down. I took a couple of nice pictures. Then he said, "Wait a minute." He ran back in the cabin. Came out with this pink giraffe. Sat it, you know. And I took it. Pete? You there, Pete? There you go. Sat it down in the snow, and I took a few shots. I said, "Okay, Stephen, we're through with that giraffe." You know, I didn't like it. I thought it was ruining the picture. And then about a half a year later, Gary was looking for an album cover through all of my pictures, and picked this one out. And so now I like the giraffe. I think it's actually, it was a present Rita had given him, and it was kind of a little signal, you know. So if you take that giraffe out, there's not that much happening, you know. It's kind of nice. Yeah. Here is, yes, the Morrison Hotel. The Doors had seen Nat Crosby, Stills, Nash cover with the rough paper, and they liked that. And they called us, you know, a few months later and said, "We want you to do our new album." And so, okay, we went down to their little office on Santa Monica Boulevard, and Ray Manzarek, the guy on the left, and Jim were in there, and we said, Gary and I went in, we said, "Okay, you guys have a title?" "No, we don't have a title." "Well, do you have some idea, maybe, of what you want on the cover?" "No, we don't have any," you know. That's why we called you guys, and we're going, okay, well. And then Ray Manzarek just speaks up, and you know what? I'm going to let the video tell you. These videos are a new concept in here, and sometimes I tell the story, and then it's the same story the video tells. So I'm going to let the video tell it, okay? Here we go. Oh, there's always, wait. Oh, you can't go back.
Covers I've taken photos for, and I mentioned the Eagles, Jackson Brown, CSN, America, and you know they say yeah, and I say yeah, Morrison Hotel. They go, dude, you took Morrison Hotel. They say, hey, this guy took Morrison Hotel, you know, and it creates a big ruckus. This was an actual place in downtown LA that Ray Manzarek discovered.
Dorothy and I are driving around, as we usually did in Los Angeles, and driving around weird neighborhoods, and we're downtown, and we come around the corner, I think it's on Hope Street, right off Pico, and there is this window saying Morrison Hotel. It was a kind of place where you could, as Jim said, the kind of place where you could start a religion or plan a murder.
Look at yonder she blows! Yonder she blows! The Morrison Hotel speaker is shit! Murder that baby! We came inside here, and I told the guy at the desk, I said, we're gonna just take a couple of pictures. We'll just be a minute, you know, no problem. He said, "Oh no." I said, "You can't do that unless you have permission from the owner." And first I was going to have him just stand in front of the window, which wouldn't have been as good.
No, not either.
But as I looked through, I could see the guy leave the desk, get in the elevator, and split. So I said, quick, run in there. And then they hit their marks. I mean, none of it planned, right? Jim was up in the middle like that, and then bang, 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 bang. One roll of film, and they were out of there.
Is this the window?
This is the window. It was right next to the door. Yes, this is it, right here. This is the window. He would be Morrison. He would be Jim Morrison, right there. Give the peace sign. Okay.
And speaking of alcohol, we were driving around. Okay, we shot this is the first part of the session. Now we need to get something to drink. Let's have lunch. Let's have something to drink. What do you want to do? So Jim said, hey, Let's go down to Skid Row. Let's go down to Main Street down there on 5th and Main.
Okay, now wasn't it right like down there?
So we go down to 5th and Main, and we're hanging out with the bums and looking for a place to go and maybe get something to drink that wasn't too scudsy. And what do we find? This is not planned at all. What do we find? But ladies and gentlemen, the Hard Rock Cafe. The original Hard Rock Cafe.
I think it was right there, man.
Do you really?
I tell you, I tell you, I tell you.
It was back there where that empty lot was.
And we went in through the doorway and went into the inside to have a couple of beers.
Yes.
And here are the guys. The album is actually called Morrison Hotel Hard Rock Cafe. So side 1 takes place in the Morrison Hotel, and side 2 of the album takes place in the Hard Rock Cafe. And who knows what kind of things could go on in the Hard Rock Cafe.
Here's where the Hard Rock Cafe was, right here where it's now a vacant lot. Because I remember shooting pictures in this hotel up here.
At the same time, when we were shooting all this stuff, the record label contacted me and they needed publicity pictures.
They needed publicity photos, so we decided we'd go to Venice and walk along the beach and walk along the boardwalk area there in front of the shops. And so we did that, and I had my Super 8 camera with me, and I was taking Super 8 movies, but mostly I was filming this pack of dogs that was following us all over the place because they were running around, their tongues hanging out. I'd run around in front of them with the Super 8 camera, and have it up above them. But I managed to get a few shots of Jim and the Doors at the same time.
And here are the Doors doing what they did. I mean, let's face it, we would drink and we would smoke pot. Whoa! It's just that you gotta know when to quit the damn thing, you know?
Usually at the end of all of these really good, fun adventure photo shoots, there's a big meal. This day was no exception. We went into the Lucky U and had some Mexican food and some really good ice cold beer.
Oh, it was great, man. What a day. And here we are. Look at them. They're just chowing on down, man. A great day was had by all. The end.
Music is your special friend. Dance on fires in intense. Music is your only friend. Tell me until the end. Until the
When that album came out, as soon as it came out, they got a call from London, and a voice on the phone said, "Would you mind if we use that name? We're going to start a cafe here in London. We'd like to call it the Hard Rock Cafe." And that was the start of the Hard Rock Empire that day, right there. Just an accident, There they are. Yeah, all those winos, they were guys who drank in the afternoon, and Jim would buy him a couple of beers and sit there and listen to them tell stories about, I left home at 16, joined the Merchant Marines, I went to Japan and got a Japanese bird in my hammock, he just loved, here you could see the poet. He wasn't very demonstrative, he didn't talk very much, he mostly listened, kind of smiled and nodded. He was a very cool guy. And here he is with his new best friends. They didn't know who he was, I mean, but they thought he was a real nice guy because he cared about them and he wanted to hear their stories. So here, a friend of mine worked at Columbia Publicity, and he called me one day and said, Henry, would you like to go out on the road with this group for a couple of weeks? And it was Ron Wood's solo solo album. He'd done an album by himself, and the Columbia said, now you have to spend the summer publicizing the album and do some tours. So he put a group together. He got Keith to play because it was between Rolling Stone tours. And he got Bobby Keys on the sax and one of the small faces, I can't think of all their names, but he got a great band together. And we toured around for a couple of weeks. It was like the Rolling Stones without Mick. So, you know, the boss wasn't there, so they could have more fun and do whatever they wanted. And so we had a great big, you know, one of those big Rolling Stone jets with bars and couches and stuff. But one concert, they were going from LA to San Diego. And the whole band and all the roadies and all had to go in buses, 3-hour bus ride. But these guys were going to go in a little tiny, a little one-engine plane. And they were going to bring, Ron was going to bring his wife, and Keith was going to bring his 18-year-old Swedish tour companion lady. And there she is. He's holding onto her feet right there, see? So at the last minute, Ron's wife didn't want to go, and I knew the road manager from the Eagles. He was one of those guys in the posse shot of the Eagles in Desperado. He said, Henry, you go in the jet, in the plane, because he knew I would get pictures, you know. They were a captive audience, but really, I was the captive audience. Because here they are doing their Mick Jagger imitation. And here they are walking out on a playing field to a plane. And what you can't hear in this is that Ron with the yellow hat he's carrying a boom box, and it's playing really loud, funky reggae music, and they're kind of bopping out to the music. You know, that's the 18-year-old Swedish tour companion in the back, and then Ron's wife with the boots. And that was the soundtrack for this whole tour. They played it all the time. In fact, when they stayed in a hotel, they would have to book the room across the hallway from Keith on either side, on the floor above and the floor below. They had to isolate his room because they would play this loud, funky reggae all night long. They would stay up all night. And the road manager, Richard Fernandez, would come to my room and they would say, oh, Henry, we're leaving in half an hour. They're up, they've been up all night in Woody's room. And I go, wow, you know, and then we get in the limos and go to another concert, or get in the plane and fly to another concert. And then, I'll tell you, so when we get to an airfield, 8 limos pull up. And they walk down and they each have a certain limo they go in. And so Keith is down there, he's got his bottle of Jack Daniels, and he's looking for his limo, you know, him and Woody would be in one. And so here he is, he gets to the limo and he's just waiting. He's doing like a doctor, was it Dr. No? What's his name? Dr. Evil. He's got his Jack Daniels, got his tour, you know, his all access pass, and he's waiting there. And I got to see, you know, great music every night, great concerts. But I learned something really, really interesting. At the back of the stage, they had a white tent. They called it a tuning tent. And then there was some guitars and strings and stuff. And there was a little line of white capsules. And they were huge downers, like horse downers or something. And they would each take one halfway through the concert. So that by the encore, they were like rubber-legged, you know, and holding each other up and falling. And the audience would think, wow, they've given their last ounce of energy for rock and roll. And wow, they go crazy. And then these guys would go back and fall on the floor like that. Literally fall on the floor in the dressing room. This happened night after night. And here's Keith laying on the floor. the girls, there's the 18-year-old Swedish companion, and they, tour companion, and Woody's wife, they wanted to wrap him in toilet paper and stick him in that garbage can, but they couldn't lift him. And there's one of the roadies, Ronald Perfit, coming in with a drink in his hand, Jack Daniels. He was totally out for like 45 minutes. And that would be the sleep that he would get for 24 hours. Then they go back to the hotel and stay up all night, you know. I don't know how they did, but. This is Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. I didn't know these guys, but my 16-year-old daughter, Zoe, wanted to see Nirvana. And I said, well, geez, I don't know those guys, but I do know their management company. And so I called them. They gave me 2 tickets and a photo pass. So I went there. Now, my wife said, now, don't you let her out of your sight for a minute, right? Yes, ma'am. And so I'm sitting way in the back, and I'm watching all my friends way down there in front of the stage. You know, the first song, all these photographers I knew were up there clicking away, and I thought, oh, God, I'm an idiot. I should be there. Zoe, honey, don't move. And I worked my way down, and the pass was only good for 3 songs. The second song, I was getting all past all the security. I got up there, and I'm all ready. The third song, he was just standing there at the mic with the yellow light. He was singing. It was kind of boring. And I thought, oh, you know, what a waste of time. And at the end of the song, he turned around and threw his guitar up in the air. And it should have been dark. It should have been blurry. I don't know even how. It was like a gift. This picture, to me, was a gift. Yeah, it didn't look like that, you know, except for the second when he turned around. Yeah. And now I always end the show with Woodstock, because that was quite a monumental thing. And that started, phone call in the kitchen, and it's Chip Monk. And he says, Henry, we're having a huge show out here in New York this summer. You ought to be here. I said, well, Chip, I've heard about it, but I don't know those guys. How am I going to get a photo pass? He says, I'll speak to the producer. The next day, Michael Lang calls me, man of few words. He says, Chip says we need you. I'm sending you an airline ticket and $500. Click. That was it. And I went out, and this is my first sight of the stage. I'd just been in the production trailer, walked through the woods, and saw that. They were building this huge platform in the middle, at the bottom of this huge hillside with alfalfa growing, and it looked like an aircraft carrier or something in the blowing green alfalfa sea. And so for 2 weeks, I just walked around. It was like summer camp for me. I went to summer camp in upstate New York too, and I just would walk around, photograph all the guys building the stage, all the guys sawing and hammering. Pete, is this working? Are you sleeping, Pete? Yeah. See all the guys working in the afternoon. The girls would come from the office and bring sandwiches and drinks, and yeah, it was really great fun. And and then the hog farm came and set up camp, and we'd go skinny dipping in the lake every afternoon. It was really, really fun. And then one day, I saw 6 people sitting way up on top of the hill. I thought, what are those? 2 weeks we hadn't seen anybody. What are they doing up there? Oh, I forgot. There's going to be a concert here, you know. And the next day there was a lot more people, and then in 2 days there was 450,000 people in that cow field. Because it went as far, left and as far right as you could see. Right and left, yes. Just a huge crowd all the way up to the, as far as you could see. And there's John Sebastian in his tie-dyes. And he wasn't on the bill. He wasn't hired to play Woodstock. He lived in the town of Woodstock, and he thought he'd just go over for the day and see a bunch of his friends on stage. So he decided to take some acid, so he could have a good time. And he got there, and the next act had not arrived by helicopter, because all the roads were closed, and the helicopter had to ring. And so Chip Monk stuck a guitar in his hand and said, quick, run out there, sing something. The next 450,000 people waiting, right? And so he ran out and went out there and sang the most beautiful he sang like he was talking to his best friend. And years later, I asked him about that. He said, yeah. He said, you know how you sit across the coffee table from your friend and you pass the joint back and forth? He said, that's what it felt like to me. You know? It was such a beautiful moment. And then, the Jefferson Airplane was there, and they spent the afternoon sitting there with Bill Graham, kneeling down. And they spent the afternoon sitting there, and they actually went on very late at night and were playing when dawn came up. And but they spent the day there, and you see Grace Slick, Paul Kantner, all the people. And that girl with the red sunglasses, I didn't know who that was, but I got a call some years ago from a young kid in the Midwest. He said, you have a picture of my mother at Woodstock. She's wearing Grace Slick's red glasses. And I sent him a picture for her birthday. And then, so there's Grace and the drummer's girlfriend, Sally Mann. I knew her from some of the clubs in LA, a lovely girl. She is now an attorney in Dallas, Texas. And so, yeah, and I've been saying that for years. And just really a couple days ago, I got a note from somebody who said, you know, I'm a friend of Sally Mann and she'd like to, you know, connect with you. Great, you know. I don't know if she's seen that picture even. But that afternoon on the stage, Jim Marshall was there, the San Francisco photographer. He was showing me a lens that Nikon had loaned him for the festival, great big telephoto lens. He said, put it on your camera, try it, you know. I put it on, I looked across. I was on this side of the stage, they were, but it was 4 times the size. And they were sitting way over there. And so I put that telephoto thing on and took this picture of Grace from way back. And that got used in Life magazine, full page. You can kind of see the crowd in her sunglasses. Years later, she was in an art show, and I didn't really know her. And I walked her, I said, hi, Grace, you know, I was at Woodstock. Remember that, you know, that picture of you, that close-up shot with it? She said, oh yeah, Jim Marshall took that. I said, okay, I walked away. I know they paid me for it, so. And I had the best seat in the house. Literally, the stage was hitting me right in the chest. All the other photographers were down in the pit, like down there looking up. But they built a little walkway for the film crew. And since I had an all-access pass, I could get it. But the film crew people would say, you can't be out here. This is just for us. And I'd say, no, I'm working for my client. You know, but it was fun, you know. And I had the best seat in the house of everybody at Woodstock. Then here, this is Monday morning. He was supposed to go on Sunday night, Jimi Hendrix. But it was so backed up that he didn't go on until Monday morning. And you know, there was a couple hours in between, I guess, and I had gone to sleep. I had a station wagon parked behind the stage. I couldn't get to my rooming house a mile down the road because it was all cars and people. So I was asleep in the back of my station wagon, and I heard, ladies and gentlemen, Jimi Hendrix. And I jumped up and grabbed my cameras and ran up the backstage stairs and got out there at the edge of the stage just as he was playing. And then he played the Star Spangled Banner. And it was so puzzling, like, wait a minute. You know, I mean, we were all peace and love, hippies against the war, against Nixon. You know, all the guys didn't want to have to be drafted and go kill people, you know, in some foreign land for what? And so we hated that whole idea of the war and all that. And here he's playing that official song. That's not our song, that's their song. Then, you know, after a while you thought, well, wait a minute, maybe he's claiming it back for us. And then years later I thought, you know, when Francis Scott Key, he started playing all those, you know, boom, crack, you know, playing war noises on his guitar in the middle of this song. When Francis Scott Key wrote that song, he was up in the hills watching the British fleet bombard Fort McHenry and rockets, red glare, bombs bursting in there. It was brilliant. And I mean, nobody really got to talk to him about that except he did the Dick Cavett show. And Dick Cavett said, Jimmy, weren't you afraid playing the Star Spangled Banner because people have, you know, big, deep feelings about that? And he said, I don't know, I thought it was beautiful. Which it was, you know, it was really. quite a moment, quite a moment. I also shot Woodstock 94 and Woodstock 99. This is Woodstock 94. And it looks timeless to me. I could say Yugoslavia, 1873. I'm sure they kissed back then. I don't know about hash pipes, but anyway, the crowd was far more interesting sometimes, than the music. Like here, always the mud people, and I'll tell you the difference between 69 and 94 is crowd surfing. No one had thought of it in 69. There wasn't one person crowd surfing, but 94 there would be 20, 30 people at a time. And here's the mud people. It always rains at Woodstock, and then they, roll in the mud. And so everywhere you looked, there were people up above the crowd. And then in Woodstock 99, it was topless girls on their boyfriend's shoulders as far as you could see. And wow. I just stood there with my telephoto looking at the crowd. And this picture, the dear little Tibetan monk, he's just trying to hold her hand, right? It's the other guy with the reach around. That's Woodstock 99. And then here is the traditional The End picture. This is David Cassidy in New Zealand. So, folks, I want to say that a portion of this tour, we're doing 7 shows in California. We did 1 in Phoenix, but mostly California. We're going down to Grass Valley and then Santa Barbara in the next couple days. And a portion of the funds from this show we're going to give to Sweet Relief, which is a charity for musicians mostly, the ones that got burned out in the fire and lost their instruments and all. And also, in the lobby we have photos for sale. They're 75% off, I'll just say. They cost 4 times as much in our gallery, so it's a special thing just for this tour. And Peter's going to play the credits in a minute, but first, I want to take a few minutes if anybody has any questions. There's usually 1 or 2. Yes? Oh, whoa, we got a microphone girl. Woo!
Who, in your opinion, had the most different personality to you versus how the media portrayed them?
Huh. Wow, that's a different than the media, but wow, I don't know, that it would be that different. I mean, usually said, who gave you the hardest time, I'd say usually David Crosby, he'd always give you the finger, but then laugh, he was a lovable guy. I mean, gosh, I don't know. It was amazing hanging out with Paul McCartney, because he's a Beatle. I do say this, the 3 gentlemen in rock and roll, that as far as my opinion, is Paul McCartney, Graham Nash, and Garth Brooks. All 3 of those guys are just so real and so down to earth, no pretenses, no egos, just pals, and that's great. And they're all, they're all heroes of mine, really. The English have a phrase, up the front, get up the front. Being a photographer, you go up the front, or like a little boy sneaking under the circus tent. I got to hang out with these people. That was amazing. So I don't know exactly an answer to somebody who was different than you think. They're all pretty much what you think and what I've been saying, I think. Anyone else have a question? Way over there.
I just wondered, did you get a chance to photograph a lot of these artists at the Troubadour?
I did. Well, I played the Troubadour a lot of times. And in those days, in the 60s, you always played a whole week. Nowadays, any club that's playing one night, really, they don't even play the whole weekend usually. We would always play 6 days. And so we played the Troubadour a lot, but that was in 64, 65. I didn't pick up a camera until 66. But yes, I did. I photographed Linda Ronstadt there when the Eagles were, before they were the Eagles, were playing with her, Joni Mitchell, Tom Waits. I did photograph quite a few people there. And I was there like about a month ago shooting somebody, and so it's still there. And yeah, I love that club. That was home. And we just went there every night, you know, when you weren't on the road. You'd be down at the Troubadour, hanging out with everybody. It was so great. Anybody else? Question?
Did you know Graham Parsons?
That's funny. That's the one guy. People say, "Oh, do you have any Graham Parsons?" No. I think I was. I don't. What year was he really big? I mean, 65, 64. I was on the road. Didn't have a camera. And when I got a camera, I'd be on the road a lot, and I just never took his picture. It's funny. I never saw him as much as he was around all the time. That's the one guy that I didn't really photograph. Anybody else?
How would your photos be different in the 60s if you had an iPhone?
Would they be different?
How would they, or would they?
Gosh, I don't know. You know, I thought in 05, I was saying, I will never go digital. I'm a film guy. You know, there's a thing about film. And then I picked up my friend's Canon that happened to be there, and I looked through it and said, oh my God, it's setting its own light reading, and it's focusing itself. Wow, this is amazing. And I went digital right then. And here's the thing about digital. When you're shooting film, every 36 pictures, you got to take a minute and do this, put new film in, and you miss stuff that way. And you got to take a light reading and set the camera and all, but it's so quick. And one chip can take 3,000 pictures, you know? And the other thing is, you get to keep them all. Like when I shoot for a magazine, I have to send them the pictures. A record company, they take that slide, and I usually never see it again. But this way, you can keep everything you shoot, and you can give it to the band, give it to the manager, give it to the magazine, anything. And that's the beauty of it. Cell phones are great. I mean, I take pictures every day. People always say, do you still take music pictures? Yeah, about once a week, you know. In a week, I'm going down to Laguna to shoot a group called Great Western, publicity shot. But I carry this little Canon, and it's got a huge telephoto lens, so it's fun to shoot. I shoot about 100 pictures a day, street photography, my friends, whatever. I've been shooting posters in here and things. And I talked myself into a corner. Well, anyway.
Okay, I had a question.
Yes? Oh.
Okay, Emma. We saw you in Monterey for the Monterey Pop Revisited with Lou Adler and Andrew Luke Oldham. I just want to hear your impression of that event in 2017.
Monterey Pop.
You were there, Henry. You were there.
You were there.
Oh, yes. We had a gallery there, Peter, didn't we? We had a photo gallery there. I remember, yeah. And somebody came in with a can of some kind of soda pop. We didn't know it had THC in it. It was fun. Well, of course it was different. You know, Monterey Pop was different than, say, Woodstock. Although, I mean, it was the first time so many great bands got together in one place. And it's where the LA bands met the San Francisco bands, which was really, really great. But it was a venue, it had seats. It wasn't like a big field with thousands of people in it. They all had seats, so it was controlled, you know. It was great both times. It's the music that makes it great, all the acts playing. Yeah.
Did you attend the Tammy show?
I played on the Tammy show. Yes, the Modern Folklore Tap. We sang a Harry Nilsson song, "This Could Be the Night," it was the theme song. But then they didn't show us playing, but like
I always wondered, you know, because I really loved yours.
Yeah, but I remember being there and photographing the Ronettes and all these great acts. Yeah. Oh, 2 more questions.
Have you hung with
Wait, we'll bring the mic over.
Quick question: did you ever use a Hasselblad camera?
One time, not a Hasselblad, but some kind of a 2 1/4. A couple of times, my art director partner, Gary Burton, said, you know, you got to use a bigger camera. Once I used an 8x10 camera, but it was to photograph a cup of coffee. It had to be really sharp, you know, and so much trouble. You have to load that film in the closet, you know, and you take one shot. And the Hasselblad, I like that, you know, that you could move around, maneuverability with the 35 millimeters. I never got into the bigger formats really. Yeah, one more.
Have you still? It's right
Uh-oh.
here. Still. Are you still taking photographs of groups?
Yes, yeah, I do. You know, not nearly as often. I was always on the road and you know, away from home. No, now, I mean, it's mostly gallery shows and slideshows and books and museums and that kind of thing. Yeah, I just did one about a month ago. It was John Cowsill and Vicki Peterson. They from the Bangles. They're a couple, and they did that album cover. So yeah, I've done about. Well, I did about 100 with Gary, I think, and I've done maybe 200. If you count DVDs, 250. But I still, yeah, like I said, I take pictures every day. Not always musicians, but and one other person was gonna.
Right here. My question. Right here.
Okay.
Right here. Have you hung with Dylan?
With Dylan.
Yes.
Well, let's see. I used to see him in Greenwich Village in 64, 65 when I lived there. I'd see him at parties. Never really talked to him though. Then I photographed him at Bangladesh. I photographed him at some big tribute concert one time with a bunch of groups. And then I knew his road manager, Victor Mamutis. And one time we were backstage, we were at an after party. And he said, Henry, you want to photograph Bobby? You know, I said, yeah, I would love to. He said, let me go talk to him. And so he said, yeah, come on over. And he was leaning on a table signing an autograph. And I said, great, now's my chance. I want to get shoot Dylan, you know. And I stood there, you know, and Victor said, yeah, this is Henry. And he's signing, and he looks up like that. I go, click. And then he looks down and he's signing. That was it. One shot. So no, I never hung out with him. But you know, the Laurel Canyon folks were all my friends. We were all musicians up there. Okay, well listen, thank you. Thank you. We're going to show the titles now, and then the photos will be out there. Easy.
West Coast rivalry. Except for one
You were turning round to see what was behind, and I took your childish laughter by surprise. And at the moment that my camera happened to find, there was just a trace of sorrow. This is your